if you're having a technical problem, if you can't hear, you can't see, if you'll put your questions there. We've got Marlene, who is monitoring that, and she will try to make sure we can help you with that problem. The question and answer is a place that you can use too. And then of course, whatever Heather and Marlene tell you to do what they tell you to do. If we have any leftover questions, we will follow up on them. And at some point during this, we also have the ability, it's not on my screen, but on your screen, there's a raise your hand button. And if you want to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand, then we'll click something on our end that allows you to unmute and ask your question. So be aware that that opportunity is there. You've got the choice between writing or speaking out loud. Oh, just a reminder, one of the things we have to do at the beginning and end is a super quick little pre and post survey. It's just a couple of questions. It'll only take a second. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. She's got the survey up, and we're only going to take a minute or so for this. So jump on in there and answer those questions.
We're just going to take a few more seconds. There are a few, 4 questions, so just giving you a little bit longer, but do try to wrap it up.
I apologize for underselling it. 4 questions takes a couple of seconds.
And we do have 77% voted. That's a good quorum if you're ready to move on.
Great. Well, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters with our huge thanks, and I will stop my video and disappear.
Thanks, Anne. Just want to see some chats in the chat box to make sure people are hearing me okay. Give me a yes, thumbs up. Tell me how you're feeling. All right. Overwhelmed. Yeah, I hear that. Marlene, why don't we do a little sound check for you as well while we're queuing things up?
Sure. Also, please let me know if you can hear me as well.
Please, yes.
Okay.
Mildly panicky. Oh, love the feelings. Let them out. Okay. If you're not a writer, we'll be doing a little discussion in a few minutes. And I want to really take a moment. I know Marlene is excited to meet all of you, and I think you're going to love her presentation. But I do want to take a few moments just because it's been quite a year, right? To say thank you to every Texan, all of you, the staff that are helping make this happen, TAC, Young Invincibles for sponsoring and presenting. Just thank you for convening us in this moment. It's a monumental moment, and we will now all share the time together where we were on a webinar during a global pandemic. All right. So with that, let's get started. We have some exciting things to try with you today. They're experimental, so I'm going to ask for your indulgence. I'm also going to ask that you try not to let any interruptions take you away. So next slide, please. So I know that's going to be really hard because we all have kids and Zooms and calls and work and people and demands. But for the next hour or so, you're with us. And so we're going to take care of you. And I just want to make sure that everything we're doing here today is helpful and clear. So we also appreciate your feedback on any of these tools that we're going to go through. And my hope is that you will leave here feeling refreshed and grounded, but also ready to share what you've learned today with others who maybe need these types of tools and techniques. So we're going to go through a meditation together. I know that may sound strange on a webinar, but I hope that you will participate and actively do that with us. I encourage you who are into essential oils or other things to get those ready. We're going to also talk substantively about the intersectionality really of enrollment in the space you all work in and social determinants of health in relationship to the world that we're in. We're going to talk about the importance of prioritizing self-care. It sounds easy. I know how hard it is. We're going to talk about how to apply guided imagery and how to take advantage of that in the moment when maybe you're feeling isolated or at home and unmoored. We're going to talk about the biopsychosocial impact of racism, and that is really where Marlene is going to educate us all about the impact of the time that we're in and how we all have a responsibility to each other in that time. And then we're going to have some open discussion, and that's our day together. So next slide, please. Marlene, would you like to add anything to the agenda?
No, I think you covered it, Heather. Thank you.
Okay, and as people keep trickling in, we'll just keep peppering you with questions in the chat box, so don't be shy. Keep the emotions coming. I know we have the ability to need to express ourselves, and I don't want anyone to feel like they need to be shy. So don't hide. Definitely let us know you're here and how you're doing. That's very helpful. So I wanted to start just to get the emotions out on the table here. It's been quite a long 4 years. I know all of you might be shaking your head. I'm hearing your sighs and all of those things from where I sit here in California. And literally, yes, it's been quite a year. There have been all kinds of tragedies and yet all kinds of revolutions that needed to happen. So there have been a lot of cons, but there have also been beautiful pros. And I think that we have to remember that in this time, the one that we're in right now, there is also one truth. And that truth is that right back to basics and why you're here. People need help. They need help from a trusted messenger. They need to know where to go to get help to enroll. They need to understand how to do it. They need to get their questions answered about coverage. And despite all of this landscape that we're all working in, that you are working in, you are still there and you are their one truth. So I want you to remember that. Next slide, please. So with that grounding, Marlene is going to walk us through a tool that I think all of you are really going to appreciate. I know I am. Take it away, Marlene.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Yeah, as Heather has stated, we want you all to not only, we don't want to just talk to you about self-care, we want you to experience it today during the webinar. And so the first thing we'll do is a grounding exercise called progressive muscle relaxation. And so what this does is it helps you to connect with your body, and any physical tension that you may be holding, you can intentionally release whatever tension that is. And it's also going to help us ground ourselves here in the present moment So away from the phone calls we have to make, the hard work that you all have waiting for you, okay? And so in order to do this, find a comfortable seated position if you can. Even if you need to like lean back, you can do that as well. Remember to breathe deeply. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so, and focus on relaxing your body. Since we are going to be tensing muscles and releasing that tension, if you have any pain or injuries in your physical body, you can avoid those affected areas as needed. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right.
Marlene, is this where you'd like me to play the music?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Sorry about that. Yes, you can start playing the music now. Thank you. All right. So again, seated with your eyes closed, maybe leaning back if you need to. Begin by taking a deep breath and noticing the filling of air filling your lungs. Hold your breath for a few seconds. Release the breath slowly and let the tension leave your body. Take in another deep breath and hold it. Again, slowly release the air. Even slower now. Take another breath. Feel your lungs and hold the air. Slowly release the breath and imagine the feeling of tension leaving your body. Now, move your attention to your feet. Begin to tense your feet by curling your toes and the arch of your foot. Hold on to the tension and notice what it feels like. Release the tension in your foot. Notice the new feeling of relaxation. Next, begin to focus on your lower leg. Tense the muscles in your calves. Hold them tightly and pay attention to the feeling of tension. Release the tension from your lower legs. Again, notice the feeling of relaxation. Remember to continue taking deep breaths. Next, tense the muscles of your upper leg and pelvis. You can do this by tightly squeezing your thighs together. Make sure you feel tenseness without going to the point of straining. And release. Feel the tension leave your muscles. Begin to tense your stomach and chest. You can do this by sucking your stomach in, squeeze harder, and hold the tension a little bit longer, and release the tension. Allow your body to go limp. Let yourself notice the feeling of relaxation. Continue taking deep breaths. Breathe in slowly, noticing the air fill your lungs and hold it. Release. Feel the air leaving your lungs. Next, tense the muscles in your back by bringing your shoulders together behind you. Hold them tightly. Tense them as hard as you can without straining, and keep holding. Release the tension from your back. Feel the tension slowly leaving your body and the new feeling of relaxation. Notice how different your body feels when you allow it to relax. Tense your arms all the way up from your hands to your shoulders. Make a fist and squeeze all the way up your arm. Hold it. Release the tension from your arms and shoulders. Notice the feeling of relaxation in your fingers, hands, arms, and shoulders. Notice how your arms feel limp and at ease. Move up to your neck and your head. Tense your face and your neck by distorting the muscles around your eyes and mouth. Release the tension. Again, notice the new feeling of relaxation. Finally, tense your entire body. Tense your feet, legs, stomach, chest, arms, head, and neck. Tense harder without straining. Hold the tension. Now release. Allow your whole body to go limp. Pay attention to the feeling of relaxation and how different it is from the feeling of tension. Now, begin to wake your body up by slowly moving your muscles. Adjust your arms and your legs. Stretch your muscles and slowly open your eyes whenever you're ready. Right. So that concludes our progressive muscle relaxation exercise. Again, this is something that you all can do in the comfort of your own home, your office, wherever you're working from, when you're feeling tension happening within your body. Take time to check in with that as needed.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I see in the chat box people really felt that and they got into it, so I really appreciate that.
Good, good.
It was very, very helpful, and I'm just going to ask us to move to the next slide. I do want to mention that today what we're doing, as Marlene indicated, is very experiential. So we're going to do a mix of things with you to give you sort of whatever might work. And meditation works for some. It doesn't work for everyone, but a guided imagery may work fast for you. It may not work for someone else. So we're going to go through those things today just so you have them all. And I just want to make sure that if we miss something or you want more of something, that you let us know, because we can make sure to get you some more tools and tips and tricks through your networks. Happy to email Anne and Melissa and everybody and make sure to keep sending them ideas as we go through open enrollment this year. So once again, thank you, Marlene. I think I'm feeling more grounded. I'm seeing that in the chat box, others are as well. So I do want to take us on a little bit of a journey here before we get into the subject matter of our session today. And specifically, I want to talk about how enrollment and the roles that you all have, both from an outreach perspective and from a work perspective, whatever it is that you may do to support enrollment, is going to interface with the world in which we live. And you're going to see so much if you haven't already, because we know that enrollment is year-round. And I just thought it would be helpful to kind of set the stage and have an image of all the things that are coming to the fore. And, you know, that includes everything from, we've seen a major uptick in uninsured who really do maybe lost coverage as a result of having employment, or maybe we're seeing an uptick of family members who are losing coverage. It's really, COVID-19 has laid bare the exposure of inequities in our society and in our world. And Texas is no exception. And so I think it's important to have these tools in your back pocket when you're feeling overwhelmed. And so, I mean, all of these issues that you see on the screen, everything from I'm in a virtual remote social distance world and I've been alone for 8 months to, you know, I'm out and about and I go to my health center every day and no one's wearing a mask. You know, there's all manner of range of issues right now. And there's also the reality that people do need help enrolling. They still need to know those facts, and you're there to supply them. Even in this environment of, you know, an eviction tsunami and a lack of adequate data to tell you where people are and where to do the outreach, there's an increased need for Medicaid, and we're going to face an election, that little thing. So there's a lot happening in the world right now. Next slide, please. I don't need to tell any of you that. You all know it. So bottom line is, how will you prioritize your self-care? So Marlene and I were hoping that some of you might chat in the chat box right now about how you're prioritizing your own self-care. And maybe it is meditating, and maybe it is going for walks, or maybe you have made a new friend in your neighborhood because you never really stayed home that much and now you're meeting all your neighbors. Whatever it is, how are you prioritizing self-care? So I think one of the things we wanted to do was a poll to check in on y'all. So next slide, please. Oh, good. Sharon says, I haven't been, but I will start. So I think what we want to go through are some self-care ideas for you. I recommend taking screenshots of these or taking notes if that's how your brain works, to remember them all. And then I want you also to put in the chat while we're doing this, what you're doing to prioritize self-care. So Marlene, I'm going to hand this over to you and then I'll come back.
Sure. Yeah, so again, I'm going to be sharing some of the self-care things that I do that are helpful for me, but also that I found very helpful for therapy clients that I have and just other people around me. So one thing that we can do is more meditation, as Heather stated, and what we just experienced just now, right? Mindfulness meditations, meaning really placing ourselves being here in the present moment, which is so, so important if you really think about all that we have going on around us in our environment. So there's got to be intentional time and space for us to check in and be here and present in the moment. In particular, there are lots of different meditations now that are easily accessible that can be specific to what you might be experiencing or feeling. One in particular that I have found very helpful is that there are some Black Lives Matter meditations specific to that. And you can find some of these on drcandicenicole.com. She is a Black woman who's also a psychologist, and she's created these meditations, and they're really, really powerful. Of kind of hearing that validation and affirmation and sinking into that the current present moment is helpful. Another way that you can do this at any time, where it doesn't matter where you are, is to name your current experience using all 5 of your senses. So naming what you see, hear, smell, taste, and what you feel is helpful because it brings you here to whatever you are currently experiencing right now, rather than thinking forward or feeling anxious and nervous about what might be about to happen. You can do more of the progressive muscle relaxation if that was helpful for you. We all know, and I'm sure have heard a lot about the role of physical exercise and how that does increase our endorphins. And so that's also something that I found to be really helpful. In particular, more recently, I've added on affirmations during physical exercise so that I'm also having this psychological or more emotional connection to moving my body and intentionally releasing whatever is hurting or whatever emotional pain I may be feeling, intentionally releasing that as I am exercising, and doing some more of those affirmations and validations I think are helpful. Creating playlists for mood, right? There's lots of these that are already curated if you have things like Spotify, Apple Music, or other forms of getting music. But it's also pretty, can be helpful if you're creating your own playlist based on music that you like, music that either boosts your mood or that matches whatever mood you might be feeling. Connecting with the actual sounds of the music, the words of the music are helpful. I'm also a huge proponent of writing it out. If there's no other form or way for you to express or release tension or whatever you're feeling, writing it out is a really good go-to no matter where you are, as a good way to a cathartic release of whatever you might be feeling. One good reason for this is that once you write it out, you can then go back and look at it. You can literally face whatever it is that you are releasing and reflect on it deeper. Another thing that has become really helpful, and I think particularly given all of what is going on right now with everything being virtual and online, is quiet time, right? We are in a time of continuous stimulation during the workday, and that's physically and also emotionally, right? We're always looking at a screen that has complications with our eyes, and how we're able to adjust throughout the day. So we've got to offset that with also being intentional. Setting aside time doesn't have to be long periods of time, but quiet time, whether that's being still in your office or going for a walk. I see someone had mentioned that in the chat. But we have to be intentional about it, because I know you all are very, very busy. So it's going to take us scheduling in that quiet time to offset the stimulation. And then if nothing else, we also have to make sure that we're meeting the bare minimum necessities, right? Which is making sure we're hydrated, eating well and often throughout the day, and sleeping at least 7 to 8 hours. That's the average. Some people do need less or more. If we're at least nourishing our bodies in that way, the amount or the capacity that we have throughout the day to withstand stress or issues that come our way is exponentially higher if we're at least nourished physically. Okay, so those are just some self-care tips. Hopefully some of these are helpful for you. I think Heather has some as well that she would like to share.
Yes, I had, and Marlene gave us this great list, and what I thought I might do is sneak in some that I use myself. So yes, next slide, please, thanks. And I'm looking in the chat and I'm seeing all these things: bike riding, taking a break from media. When I surveyed a couple friends, they said, don't doom scroll, meaning don't get on your phone in your bed and go through all the gloom and doom of the day right before you're going to sleep. So, and I saw Sonia mentioned avoiding Facebook. I think social media can be our friend. We want to use it to do virtual outreach, but we need to balance how much of it we let in. Long walks, meditation, playing games with friends. I love that. Now there are these party apps and all these interactive game apps too, where you don't have to be alone all the time, and you can play Scrabble and do all kinds of things that just make you forget and make you focus in the moment. But a couple that I wanted to highlight specifically, I don't know how many of you have seen or used this app. It's free. The My Life app has very short meditations. It also has meditations based on not just your mood, which you put in your feelings for that day, and then it gives you some meditative suggestions, but it also has specific topics such as celebrating Black and brown bodies, making sure that you make time for yourself. What is self-care? Very specific meditations. So I highly recommend this app. Plus, it's of no cost to you. And I'm using it myself, so I can tell you I've tested it, and I think it's pretty dang good. And every meditation is in English and Spanish. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to highlight a couple more. We're just going to zoom through these. So another one that is not free, but is very, is medically tested and statistically significant around pain management is using specific meditations in a roadmap format to both educate you, explain the mind-body connection, and help you understand how any emotional pain may be contributing to physical pain. If you feel like this is for you, it is well worth the money. I think you pay an annual fee and you get classes, you get interactive groups, you get meditations, and you get a personal roadmap for your own pain management. Next slide, please. And oh, this is called the Curable app, C-U-R-A-B-L-E. So many of you are probably also using Insight Timer. This is a really great free app. It's vast and huge. There's so much in it, it can overwhelm you when all you want to do is meditate. So I encourage you to just sort of go in there when you have time and look through all the things that it offers. But there is everything in here from classes to meditation to relaxing music, and it's international, all over the world. So there are multilingual meditations in here in nearly every language, and I highly recommend allowing some time to play around in that. Someone mentioned they use Sleep Pillow to go to sleep with relaxing music. That's great. Yes. Some people may also just turn on their fan, right? But anything that helps you drown out the noise of the day, I think, is really beneficial for your brain waves, frankly. Next slide, please. And then I also wanted to highlight something that can be fun. It can be done with those of you who are parents at home with your kids all day. You can do this pretty much anywhere in a classroom, in a health center, which is power posing. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with power posing, but essentially there is statistical significance that has proven that people who take a moment to take on a power pose, be it Wonder Woman, Tall and Proud, or some other exuberant pose, believe it or not, it has immediately resulted in building confidence in that moment. And when you feel like you're weak, or you feel like you're not yourself, or you don't have your mojo, I highly recommend taking a minute and doing a power pose alone with others. There is a YouTube video on this that shows you more specifically how to do it. And I have it linked in the notes in this deck, but I would say before even presenting, right? If you're doing a conversational chat or you're presenting on a webinar yourself, try some power posing to really get into the moment and make sure that you're not distracted by all these other things happening. If you're going to meet with maybe a client who is really tests you, right? Try a power pose before that meeting and get yourself in that moment. Next slide, please. I hear you on the huggers. I live alone, so I can relate to that. Okay, so many examples of self-care. I included some cartoon images here, but they pretty much cover it. You know, if you can, get some fresh flowers for yourself. Make sure that you just lock yourself in the bathroom and take a bath. Figure out how to get that 5 minutes in. Drink fancy beverages. So there are a lot of different kinds of flavored waters now that are truly phenomenal. Look forward to those at the end of your day. Don't drink them all day. Make it a ritual at the end of your day. Next slide, please. I think we're all doing lots of Netflixing, Netflix binging and Hulu. And so take a break from the subscription services and maybe go in rotation. If you feel like, hey, I'm spending way too much on all of these subscriptions because they can add up, choose which one and make it fun and go through a rotation with each one and really dive in. Also, therapy. There are lots of apps for that. I'm going to mention a few here. Taking ownership of your finances is another example. We're not commuting, or maybe we're commuting less. Maybe we're not spending money at Starbucks. We're not spending money on lunch. There are things that can be good about this pandemic because it put our spending on pause. So take a step back and look at the world around you and take note of where things are good. Gratitude journaling is really important. Take a moment at the end of every day, you close your laptop or you leave work and you write down 3 highlights of your day. Only 3, you don't need to come up with any more. Next slide, please. Exercise, we said, taking walks is good. Sleep is important. Okay, so community care, I included this one, although it's probably harder with our social distancing life right now, but it is important. And someone mentioned in the chat that they play games with friends on the weekend. And then I see someone just wrote wind down Wednesdays and Freaky Fridays with music, food, and dancing. So yes, do those things. Don't worry about anybody judging you. Be in the moment that we're in right now. And there's so many different opportunities that people never thought about in terms of the virtual world and being able to connect. Think about it like this. I pose this to everyone in Texas. In the past, you had a session with only Texas in the room. In effect, you could have this same session and I could be in the UK and you could be in Australia. And the boundaries are loosening up. We no longer have to live in the confines of our geography. So think about how that opens up your resources in your life as well. Next slide, please. So you have some good ideas from these. I'm just gonna keep going. Next slide. And structural care is also a big one. We're gonna get into that and we'll talk more about that later. But I just wanted you to have those visuals for yourselves when the webinar is over and you are getting overwhelmed and you wanna think of new ideas and it's just not coming to you, you have these visuals. Some other self-care tech, Talkspace, the Calm app, Headspace, BetterHelp. Next slide, please. As some other examples to look into. Those are all sort of therapy apps that you can really go deep with, or just use the free versions of them and test them out first and see if you even like them. So we're going to do a quick poll with everyone because I see many of you have put ideas in the chat box for us. And the poll question that we have for you is specific to the time we're in right now. So I know that you maybe prioritize self-care before COVID-19, but I want you to focus and be intentional, as Marlene said, and be deliberate about right now. During COVID-19, during this time of a global pandemic, which has not happened for 100 years, please select any and all of the ways and methods that you're using the most for self-care for yourself. And if there isn't anything in this list or if things are missing from this list, please just type them in the chat. We'll give you a few minutes to answer the poll. And I'm going to answer it too. I'm also seeing painting, in addition to worship and Bible study. A lot of people participating in church groups, probably online as well. Praying. I don't use any. We're going to have to get some ideas. Watching movies I've never seen, positive self-coaching, Zumba, yoga, reading, praying. Renovating the house room by room, that is a respectable goal. I'm loving all these ideas. Okay, what are the results of our poll? I think we can close that. Okay, very close, working out and binging TV shows. So there's getting out and working out, or as Marlene indicated, you know, working out and maybe hopefully adding some affirmations in there, or you will now. And binging TV shows and movies, probably because we didn't have time before, right? In addition to all these other ideas, working in the yard, gardening. These are tremendous ideas, watching 90s movies with my teenager. Seeing the world through someone else's eyes who didn't experience it at the time is a good one. Okay, and I'm seeing Zoom happy hours was pretty low on the list. I think kind of everyone may be zoomed out, honestly, at this point in the pandemic, but we'll see how it evolves as time plays on. All right, keep them coming. Please keep the ideas coming, because you never know how you're helping someone else come up with their new ideas. Marlene, I want to take a second to check in with you if you had any ideas to share about the self-care that you're doing for yourself during this time.
Sure, and thank you, Heather. I think, you know, similarly to what I've shared previously, that the main thing, right, that I have had to really get with myself about with self-care, especially right now, is being intentional. There's that word again, right? Because it feels like everything is so much busier. Things are heavier because, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, there's layers, there's multiple layers of what we're experiencing right now beyond just the pandemic, right? And so it's really taken me time and practice being intentional about setting aside the time to do the self-care stuff. Otherwise, it doesn't get done, or I'm not doing enough of it, and then I find that my energy has been depleted, and it's hard for me to continue doing all of the hard work that we have to do. So that if you take nothing else away from this, please know that it is going to take that intentional effort for us to take care of ourselves.
I think that's a great point. I share that. The intentionality is really important, prioritizing it for ourselves. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Okay, let's move on, because we want to get to some other material. I just wanted to give you another sort of sampler of something to try here. This is a very condensed version of guided imagery, and we're going to have to kind of move through it pretty quickly, but I will give you the tips on how to do it, and then potentially we can come back and just do this for 1 hour together so that it can actually have some lasting effects. But I want you have an assignment as a result of this webinar. I want you to find and locate at least one image that takes you away. And if you have one already, fantastic, find another one. I want you to find at least one image that takes you away to another place. And we're going to do this right now and practice it so that you know how to do it later and potentially can share this with others who maybe need it as well. Some of you have probably done guided imagery either, you know, in your workplace or even in school, or you learned about it somewhere or in therapy session. But I wanted to bring it up today because some of us are more visual and some of us are more auditory. And this can really combine the two together in a really nice, beautiful, succinct way. Guided imagery is a relaxation technique that draws on your ability to visualize and imagine yourself in that place. And it's super easy to practice. And of course, our brains don't stop, right? So I'm going to ask you that you not worry about your thoughts or your brain during this activity, and that you go with it anyway, and you respect the fact that brains think, and that's what they do. And you see those thoughts and you just let them go. So let's try it. Next slide, please. All right. I have plopped us right down in the middle of a mountain range. And I'm going to ask you to just look at this image. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions. and I'd like you to answer them in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to. But now that I have taken us to this mountain range, and again, don't worry about your thoughts. If they start to wander, all good. Don't worry about them. Brains think, that's what they do. We want them to do what they do best. I want to know what it is that you hear in this image. What do you hear? Do you hear birds? Do you hear water? Wind? Keep it coming. I want to know what you smell by being here. What does it smell like to be here? What does it taste like? Great. What does it feel like to be here? What do you end up touching when you're here? And when you arrive here, how do you feel? Keep them coming. I see all these great feelings. Let's use all of our senses, as Marlene indicated early on. Beautiful. So we're doing an around the world trip right now, and we're practicing guided imagery. Vacations, remember those? I want to go to the next slide, and I want to take us somewhere else. Now, for my warm water ocean lovers, I've just taken us halfway around the world to this location. What do you feel now that I've left you here? What do you taste? Fish tacos, yes. What do you smell? How does it feel to be here? What are you going to do now that you're here? These are great. I want to make a point to point out that it is very quiet in this moment, and you're connecting with so many feelings and senses. So to Marlene's point earlier, in order to ground ourselves, we may need to add a visual to really take us there, because our brains tend to overthink. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to do this activity with all of you is to give you this as an added dimension so that you have this outlet. So again, your homework is to have 1 or 2 images, put them on your phone, print them out, put them on your laptop, put them in your line of sight, put them where you will see them. They will be your motivation, and they can be your grounding during this time. And I want you to check in with all your senses when you look at it. How does it feel? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? And if you have another sense, go for it. But I'm just encouraging you to make sure that you allow this time. We did this in 5 minutes. How's everyone feeling now? please put it in the chat. And then I would ask that we move on to the next slide. So I'm going to hand this over to Marlene to really take us through the next segment of our session together. And then we'll come back and we will just talk and digest and answer questions with each other. Thank you, everyone.
Sure. So now that we are all relaxed and visualizing, having those images, I think that's really, really helpful. We'll kind of shift gears a little bit. Again, one of the main things that we also want to address in the webinar today, right, is what a lot of us are feeling the weight of, and that is, quite frankly, racism. That is the other pandemic, okay, that we're feeling. One way that I invite us to think about how this has impacted us is through what's called the biopsychosocial model, right? And all that this does is it highlights and shows the ways in which we are affected physically, psychologically, and socially, and how all of those relate and overlap with each other, right? We all know, right, that racism is not new to Black and Brown communities, right? Things like immigration laws, unequal healthcare access, police brutality, amongst so many others, are all parts of a racist system that serves to oppress Black and Brown communities. What is also causing more of this stress or heightened stress response amongst all of us is, again, the nation as a whole having to answer to this, right? To answer to these lasting effects historically and in the present moment, and how it has these lasting effects on us biologically, psychologically, and socially, right? Things like when you experience, whether you're experiencing racism directly or indirectly, it can have effects on your body, your mental health as well, right? Think about watching these very traumatic videos, right, that are surfing around the internet, right, of innocent Black bodies being killed by the police. Even if you're not there directly, you are experiencing that event as if you were there. And that does have an impact on you and your body. Even protesting, whether you've been protesting in person or from the comfort of your home, and starting these really difficult conversations, that can also induce some of that stress as well. So when I talk about the biological, right, I'm talking about physical health symptoms that can come from experiencing racism, right, and can cause these physiological responses in our body. With stress, right, our nervous system reacts, right, by either fighting it off, right, going directly to the source of the problem, flighting or running away from it, or freezing. So these are things to kind of just pay attention to. What is the way that your body responds to the impact of racism? Psychological, meaning things like your mental and emotional health. Sometimes we experience mood changes, right? Irritable, or maybe feeling more sad than normal. And it can often, unfortunately, cause shifts in our perceptions of our own culture and race, because we live in a system and an environment that serves to denigrate and oppress us. So it can cause us to have some of those shifts, or at least questions about our identity. And then in the social realm, these are when we're experiencing some of these racist encounters, right? That could be in our daily life, could be, some are more overt and explicit, and others are more on a micro level, like microaggressions or more subtle comments or behaviors that someone may say to you that communicates that you are not equal, right? And so if you look at the visual on the right, all this is representing is, so these outer rings or circles are representing those different levels in our environment that we are experiencing and exposed to forms of racism. The person in the middle, think about that as being you, right? And on these outer rings, think about that being like work life, home life, political environment, overall cultural environment, and how on these several different levels, we are being impacted biologically, psychologically, and socially. Okay, you can move to the next slide, please. And so this also brings points to more specifically racial trauma. And I think it's important that we talk about this because we're naming what it is that a lot of us, in particular, Black and Brown communities, are experiencing right now. Many of you who are on this webinar, and also many of the populations that you serve in the work that you do, are experiencing racial trauma. What is racial trauma? So racial trauma is considered a mental injury. So the psychological community does not at this moment conceptualize this as being per se a diagnosis or a disorder, though it meets a lot of the criteria for one. A mental injury that results from living within a racist system that exposes an individual to an accumulation of either direct or indirect forms of racism, right? The key word in there is that accumulation, that for most people of color, when they're experiencing racism, it's not a one-time event, right? These are things that are happening for many of us on a daily basis, whether it's directly or indirectly. And so over time, that accumulation of these events, and especially right now, it's very heightened because this is happening also at a national, very exposed level, right? That over time, that accumulation, it adds up, and it adds up, causing more of an impact on all of us. And so when we talk about the psychological impact of that in particular, it can lead to, and this is based in research. Research has found these connections here, that experiencing a lot of racial trauma can contribute to feelings of depression, an increase in anger, right? Think about that anger response is as a valid response, right? If someone is experiencing racism. Rumination, meaning constant replaying in our minds these racist events that we are experiencing. And also hypervigilance. This is where we might feel this heightened response to any kind of threat relating to racism, of needing to feel extra protective of ourselves, our community, and other people around us. Sometimes this hypervigilance is experienced almost like anxiousness or nervousness, right? Where you might feel like an increase in heart rate, sweating, things like that, that your body is literally trying to help you get ready to protect yourself. And then some of the physical impact. Again, think about the biological component in terms of how your nervous system is reacting to experiencing this. Things like headaches. We might experience having more headaches than normal. Muscle tension. So again, progressive muscle relaxation is going to be helpful with that. Naturally, our bodies are going to hold that tension. And so we have to be intentional about allowing time to release that tension. Other types of pains in our bodies. So we want to be keeping, staying in touch with our bodies and listening to what is my body telling me right now in terms of stress. We might even also experience some trouble sleeping, right? That when we lay down to go to sleep, our feelings and the thoughts that we have around, the state of racial tension right now, they don't necessarily go away just because we lay down to relax. Our brain is still operating and very well activated, which can cause us to have a lot of trouble sleeping. Now, one question that I get asked a lot about racial trauma is, how is racial trauma different or similar to other forms of trauma? In particular, what most people have heard about, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, right? It's similar in the fact that all of these same types of impact are very similar to PTSD, right? What is a little bit different is in the particular impact of avoidance. So, for example, we'll use if someone has experienced a really traumatic event in their lives, it's very common that they will engage in ways to avoid being put in that same position ever again, right? Because it's going to hurt them. Now, when we apply that same idea to racial trauma, it's a little bit trickier because for a lot of people of color, it's hard to avoid that, right? We can do things to try to avoid it, but we still have to go to work, right? Where maybe we have some people in our workplaces that have communicated we're not equal, right? And we still have to exist and live in a system that has racist ideals. So it's much harder for us to avoid, and that accumulation continues to pile up. So I think you can go to the next slide. Okay, so then the next question is often, okay, how can we help reduce this racial stress, right? And yes, a lot of what we've said before can be applied here as well, right? Progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, sleep, all of those are going to be great. Here on this slide are some resources that are specific to racial stress that we could add on to those. Number one is therapy. Of course, myself as a psychologist, I'm going to always, always, always encourage the use of therapy for everyone. And there are increasing ways for us to gain more access, more equitable access to therapy. It's a whole other webinar that I wish we could go into. But what I have here is there's a website here that also includes some therapist directories of therapists who specifically have experience or work with racial trauma and other needs that you might have. That could be a starting point of at least identifying a therapist that meets the needs that you may have right now. There's also some other resources that you can do in your own time in whatever setting works for you that I have found to be really, really helpful. One is this interactive book called the Racial Healing Handbook. And this is something that I've used for myself. I've also used it for my students. And what this is really good at is that it's informative, more about racism and its impacts on us. And it also has these different exercises in it and prompts for us to reflect on our own experiences of racism and our racial identity, right? It helps kind of kickstart that healing process to identify and acknowledge these kind of outdated narratives and messages that we've learned about race, and to reflect on how we want to kind of retell that story for ourselves and how we can heal from that pain. And it is meant not only for people of color, but it is also made in a way that other individuals who are wanting more education and awareness around this and to reflect on maybe their own engagement in racism can also use this as well as a tool. There's also a really good book. Last time I checked, it was so good that it was sold out on Amazon, but maybe it's back there. And you can find it at other bookstores as well. It's titled My Grandmother's Hands, and it's by a licensed therapist. And what's really awesome about this book is that it is specific to racial trauma. It tells a story about how racial trauma impacts people of color, and it details its connections to our history of slavery in this country. And it also includes a lot of tools, like actual applicable, tangible tools that you can use to help in your healing process from racial trauma. So books are really good, again, because you can use them on your own time. You can get into it at whatever depth feels right for you. Obviously, self-care, as everything that we've stated before. But with that self-care, in specifically speaking to how we reduce racial stress, the big thing here to focus on is liberation and empowerment, right? particularly, again, because if we are existing in a system that serves to oppress people of color or of other marginalized identities, right? That our self-care has then got to be focused on the opposite, the other end of that, liberating ourselves and empowering ourselves, right? One way that we can do this, and that is grounded or supported by the research literature, psychology research literature, is in really focusing on understanding and connecting with our own racial and cultural identity, right? Having cultural pride, right? Because that allows us to have like almost like a safety net, something to lean onto and to remain connected with our group when it feels like we're being attacked, right? And then the other big thing, I think we've said this maybe peripherally throughout this, but rest. Rest is absolutely crucial. Whenever I talk about this with people, I think about ways that we can kind of shift away from viewing rest as not productive, right? I think in this generation and this time, there's so much talk about we got to be productive, work hard, do as many reports as you can in a day. But my question to all of you is, well, what if we instead viewed rest as actually productive, right? That rest is for our restoration, right? It provides us the energy that we need to continue doing the really hard work that we do, right? The other piece of this is protect your peace while disturbing the peace, right? That when we say rest, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't speak up for Black Lives Matter, for other related initiatives. It means that while we are in this fight, standing up for Black Lives Matter or addressing racism or other forms of oppression, it means that while we're putting our energy in doing that, that we're also protecting our peace, right? Setting healthy boundaries, as Heather stated earlier, allowing us time to rest, that we have to also be pouring back into ourselves throughout this process. Otherwise, we will become depleted of our energy and then experience that burnout that's sometimes really hard to bounce back from. So those are just some of, it's like a starter kit, I guess, if you will, of things that you can utilize for reducing some of that racial stress. I think you can go to the next slide. Let's see what's there. Okay, you can go back, I'm sorry. I think, Heather, we have some time now, right, for any kinds of questions anybody might have or comments on what we just talked about.
We do. I wanted to highlight, first of all, thank you. That was, all of those tools and resources are so helpful and practical and real. And I think there's so much response to it in the chat. I just wanted to highlight something that Marlene
Sure.
brought up, which is on a previous webinar for persons of color, people of color. We were told how rest is not a privilege, but a right that has been dismissed. Do you want to respond to that at all or talk a little bit about that?
Say that statement again, that it's a right.
That rest is not a privilege, but a right that has been dismissed. So if you're a person of color, do you have the right to rest?
Yes.
And I feel like that speaks on such a meta level that I think it merits discussion, if that's all right, if you want to respond to that at all.
Well, absolutely, right? I think it speaks again to, well, for me, it takes me back to thinking about this in a historical perspective, right? That for Black and Brown communities, rest for a long time has never been an option. That the foundations of our country are built on the really hard work of Black and Brown communities, right? And rest meant that you were going to be physically hurt, right, in some ways. So for some individuals who don't identify as Black or brown, there is that privilege that you can in your everyday life have, you know, more of a propensity or capacity for rest, right? Because you may not be feeling these ongoing pressures of racial stress and racial trauma like others are. But it's something that we've got to, again, like shift our understanding of in this moment, right? This idea that you deserve to rest, right? Our ancestors, our Black and brown ancestors have fought so very hard, right? So that we're at this point where A, you deserve to rest, and B, it is imperative that we rest so that we can continue addressing these really hard, difficult conversations, advocating for these policies to be put in place, right? Because without that rest, we don't have the restoration and energy we need to keep going.
Thank you for responding to that. It really resonated with me in the chat. I know we want to do Q&A. I do want to highlight a couple of resources real quick, if we could advance to the last two slides. And I also don't want to skip over thanking all of you because you're remarkable. I wish I was there with you to set balloons free and blow our stress in them, or do some tapping like we did last year. Maybe we'll do that in 2021. But I wanted to highlight a new resource by APHA, the American Public Health Association, which, in addition to all the tools that we've talked about here, they have just last week, created a whole series of webinars, toolkits, questions, and discussion guides that I highly recommend folks take a look at and dive into and see how they might be able to apply in the setting by which you work, and help your colleagues have this conversation. Use the tools that we talked about today in that discussion, and unpack some of these resources together. Don't just let these waft over you. Oh, those are great resources. Take the time to dive into them. Another one I want to point out in the next slide is specific to O&E. I'm happy to talk about this offline as part of some other discussion as well, but in the next slide, I've posted a sample of an outreach and enrollment workflow that we created specifically for people to have conversations around. If you could just advance to that last slide, and then we'll wrap up really quick and do questions. There's one more after this. Yeah. So, and I also want to give a shout out to every Texan who Melissa and I think it's Ariana helped us kind of get all this down on paper, because we interviewed a bunch of people around the country to create this guide. My colleague Sarah Gleistine, who's on this webinar right now, is our policy analyst. We depicted for NAC, the National Association of Community Health Centers, a visual that would help people train around and talk through the process and workflow for how to do virtual O&E work this year. And what I would challenge all of you to do is figure out how self-care fits into this model, and figure out how celebrating Black and brown lives can fit into this model, and where you're going to do it. And is that part of your workflow? So with that, I just wanted to make sure you guys knew about those two extra resources. And I think, Anne, the floor is yours, however you want to do this.
As always, I'm still muted. That's the role of an old lady in every Zoom call, right? So we do have one that's already been typed into the Q&A, and folks feel free to add to that. And don't forget, you can also raise your hand if you would rather talk than write. But one of the questions that came in earlier, I have no idea how you're going to answer this, but I thought it was a great question. It says, given the fact that many people are binging, what recommendations do you recommend about the genre of movies and generally the diet of movies and other videos content that you're feeding your mind?
Assuming you want us both to respond to that.
Yes.
Marlene, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think this is an interesting question, right? The first thing that kind of comes to my mind is being intentional about not overstimulating yourself with a bunch of heavy stuff. The way that I kind of envision binge watching TV or shows, for me at least, is a way to kind of escape. So I think anything that allows you to be able to do that, right, I think is good. Things that make you laugh, feel good. And on the other side of that, though, that I have kind of had to get with myself about is, okay, am I avoiding this too much? So I can also, right, like pick some documentaries or more informative pieces, or maybe even podcasts that I can have on while I'm eating lunch or driving in the car, so that I'm also feeding that part as well and not completely avoiding everything else going on around me. If that makes sense.
I agree with that. And I would just layer on, break up the algorithm. So, you know, your Netflix, your Hulu, your whatever's are using an algorithm to feed content to you. Break it up. Search for something completely different and make sure that, you know, you're not just going right into the next show, but to be deliberate about what you're watching. And you know what I've started to do? I've stopped watching things, which is a no-no for me because I grew up in the theater and I'm an avid movie buff, and I've seen almost every show. And what I will do now is I'll just spend 30 minutes deciding whether I'm going to go down that road with this show or I'm going to bail. So I give it 30 minutes and then I decide, how's this making me feel? I'm not feeling good about the world. I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just look for something else. It's a good question, because speaking of the guided imagery, I mean, the television is your guided imagery. It's live emotion guided imagery. So you're going to end up thinking that you're, you know, a drug dealer in the Ozarks if you watch too much of one thing. So you definitely don't want to absorb more problems through watching things on television. It can be a problem.
Heather, I commend you, because I think you're more patient than I am. You give 30 minutes, I give about 5. And it's actually a running joke in my household that I'm too impatient with it. But something else with that I realize is a part of it, like you said, is checking in with how I'm feeling in that moment, right? If I'm already heightened and feeling the tension from everything going on, watching things like the Ozarks or lots of shooting and things is just going to increase some of my anxiousness, and instead of offset it and help me to calm and release. So that's also something helpful. Check in with yourself. How are you feeling and what do you need in terms of what you're watching at that time?
I feel so validated by Marlene, because that's exactly the show that my husband and I decided we couldn't watch after 2 episodes.
It's too much. Yeah.
I want to give one last chance for a question. We're at 2:56 and we do need to do our final survey.
Okay.
So I'm not seeing anything with hands up or in the Q&A. I do want to go ahead and give a virtual round of applause for Marlene and Heather. I think that this has been a gold mine of a session, and I can't wait for the fact that we're all going to have the slides and the recording of it. And I have a feeling you guys are going to be asked to do this over and over again. But thank you. Feel free to put your applause in the chat. And I do want to remind you guys that tomorrow's sessions are an update on SNAP and Healthy Texas Women, and the all-important session on the challenges and workarounds for doing remote enrollment. So I'm going to ask Melissa to go ahead and launch the closing survey, and then we'll take a couple of minutes to do that. And while we wait for that, let's see how many questions this one has. Yes, it's 4. It's also 4 questions. So please take a couple of minutes to do that survey. It helps us all, and particularly helps TAC with measurements that they need to do. So please go ahead and respond to that if you can. And again, I will just gush a little bit about how much I appreciate Heather and Marlene. I basically asked them to take this on and then just set them free because I knew I had absolutely nothing in the way of wisdom to add to it. And they've certainly more than lived up to my already optimistic expectations. I think this has been really great. I can't wait to get my husband to go through this webinar next week after it gets posted. So we're going to keep this open for just for a couple more minutes.
Thank you. I do want to take a second to just say thank you to everyone on this call. I mean, you all do such important work, and I know you've heard it before. And I know that asking you to do one more thing, I hope didn't come across as us not appreciating you. I would love to walk you through whatever guided imagery is needed during OEE. Call me back. I'm happy to do it. You know how to reach me. I'm not a stranger, and I'm sure Marlene feels the same. We just want to be there for you and support you in this work. It's really important what you do. So thank you for it.